If society determines morals, there will always be huge mistakes. There's a minority out there that has no uh, ability to express themselves. They see more benefit in it for themselves. That's why they want it to be true. I cannot argue that. I don't know how many people can argue that because they're so self-centered. Yeah, this is a weird argument of atheists that atheists make when it's way more comfortable to be an atheist because I was an atheist, or not an atheist, but an agnostic, and I didn't have to be like I wasn't accountable for things no one saw, or I was never held accountable for a lot of things in my head, and I could justify way more and with my own morality because your own morality you're always a victim of deception, and especially the people that are atheists or agnostics and they say, oh, I'm a good person, I know I'm a good person, which I was that person. The more I am in the word and the longer I walk with Christ, I realize that, man, was I wrong. And I I don't I have a hard time calling myself a good person. Maybe maybe I could call myself a good person in comparison through like compared to the average of society because there's so much sin and wrongdoing that maybe my sin wouldn't be at high of a level. But I would not call myself a good person. I would I try, and but I fail. And for knowing how many times I fail, it is tough to say that, to judge myself. Um, and good is not a measure of comparison, I think, because it's like a yes or no question. Is something black or white in comparison? No, it's black or white. It can't be black or white in comparison. In comparison to white, dark gray is black, but it's still not black. So you still can't say I'm good. I'm leaning more towards good than bad. Maybe you can say that. Very philosophical thing, but overall is like, and that is why a higher standard and a choosing God as your objective morality will always be better. And because you have an extra incentive to do good. But it could still, when we come to that, the objective morality, do I think there's no objective morality when um, there is no God? And I think, first of all, there's a sense of it, a godly sense of it in most of us that we kind of know, but we can be deceived by our hearts that's what God says. So it gets more and more difficult, especially in an egocentric society that we have, where it's all about self-development, self-fulfillment, self. And therefore, if it's all about self, we our society tries to tell each other how to justify their selfishness. And, and that is one big issue. Technically, through empirical data and seeing outcomes of actions, you could determine what's better because of the outcomes, but that will always lead to God's word, anyways. That will always lead to, oh, turns out, like we found out, it was a good idea to live just like Jesus. It was a good idea to live after God's laws, because God's laws are just correct. And you can get there without God, possibly, but with lesser conviction, probably. And most people just won't, and especially in our society. And the problem is that actual morals, true morality does not change. But society changes it all the time because of their selfishness or because of majorities that want something for them to happen. Because if the majority rules, they can rule totally unjust and implement totally unjust moral standards because they are in the majority and they can overrule the others by that. So then it is just a majority moral. That's why there was slavery was easy because a majority benefited, or at least even if it's not a majority, the stronger benefited. And as Christians, we know the poor, the weak, we're supposed to help them. But if you're a selfish society, you won't do that. And therefore, so like if society determines morals, there will always be huge mistakes. There's a minority out there that has no ability to express themselves, and that is unborn children. And therefore, just recently, there was a law signed in some northern state, I think Michigan, that now up to birth, abortions are allowed. I mean, it depends on the doctor, I think, but it's not impossible, but it should be just impossible. But, so there's things that are happening where it's clearly wrong. It's clearly wrong. And people can argue against it, but it's just going to be selfish because taking a life is for your own benefit, will always be taking a life. And if you wouldn't take that life, you would maybe have to suffer for sure. But when you look at it, is your own suffering as much worth as taking a human life? And no one can argue that taking a human life is, and no one can argue that murder is a good thing. And people can argue that it's no murder, but they can only argue that because they want to. They want this to be true, not because it is true. They want it to be true. People want a lot of things to be true because they see more benefit in it for themselves. That's why they want it to be true. And before I was Christian, I also thought I didn't give much thought on abortion, but I thought, yeah, of course, like it's her choice, and well, and then I just like looked into it, and I'm like, there's no way to argue for that. I can't. Just my logic and my morals, they just I can't find a way to argue for that. Because what is the alternative? Like, and some people say, yeah, the mother is going to die if there's no abortion. All right, then it's life for life. But this is like 1 out of a million cases. Maybe it's like 100 out of a million cases. But 99% of the cases are just because, oh, I don't want the child. Because my life's going to be harder for a while. Because you can always give it up for adoption. So your life is going to be harder for how much? 8 months or 9. But the first 2, you don't feel anything. So let's say 7. And that's what you would trade in for human life. You can't argue. Let's be honest, you can't argue that you're suffering, however hard it'll be for 7 months, is worth more than a human life. I don't know how you can argue that. It's just like a human life. A human life is up here. You're suffering like the craziest suffering you can have. It can't be as high as a human life. It can't. I cannot argue that. I don't know how many people can argue that because they're so self-centered. They're self-centered. And I feel for a lot of people that go through hard things, and rape is terrible in that. I don't know how to argue for that. But I can also tell you that I don't I'm very sure that most of the women, even after rape, if they don't care of the child, will feel some guilt. So that's also there. So it does not even have to necessarily make your life better. And does like how many people are super successful at least, or seemingly have a good life, or had a great impact on humanity that were orphans? So many people. And you'd have all killed them. You'd have all no problem if they never existed. And that's just, to me, a very weird thing to argue for. Um, and it always argued with like some, even if you give them, let's say, those exceptions, 99% are still no exception. They're still just performed because people don't want the child, because maybe it's too expensive or whatever, but you can always give it up for adoption still. So I don't see that argument at all. I don't see it. You can also go to your church and ask for help. Maybe a good idea. If you're a young woman, or if you need help, or if you are desperate in any way that you can't like feed the baby, whatever it might be, go to your church, go to a few churches, maybe, you know, those are the people that will help.